So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio.
Welcome back. Boy, do we have an action-packed show today. As always, it's Thursday, and that means it's our marriage hour. And if there's ever a topic you want us to take up, anything related to dating, parenting, marriage, threats to marriage, go ahead and let us know. Just head over to relevantradio.com/trending, and you can send us a message on social media or through our email there. Part of the reason we've chosen marriage for Thursdays is because we're meant to be praying the luminous mysteries of the Rosary. And there we celebrate the feast, right? The feast of the wedding feast at Cana. We also celebrate that feast of the first Eucharistic supper, the institution of the Eucharist. All great reminders of what marriage is ultimately oriented toward. So coming up today, if you'd like to join the conversation, listen up. This is what we're talking about. Do you hear about that mommy vlogger on YouTube who gave up her adopted child who has autism to another family? There's some harsh criticisms, maybe justifiably so, but I actually want to talk about this from a different perspective. That has to do with being open to life while maybe experiencing infertility in your own life. What is the proper attitude as Catholics with regard to adoption and quote-unquote returning your kid? Also, we're going to go ahead and be joined by Jim O'Day from Integrity Restored. We'll be talking about various topics concerning parenting and this desire to be your kid's best friend, and also how to kind of implement authority and discipline in their lives. Finally, we'll also talk about this attitude about how many people, although married, tend to act single still. And I'm not just talking about newlyweds. It's a trend. And so it's something, whether you're newlywed or not, maybe there have been phases in your own life where you're like, man, I'm just over this. I'm going to do my own thing. I think this is applicable for everyone. If you want to weigh in or ask a question, the number is 1-888-914-9149. Again, that number is 1-888-914-9149. Now, these words are atrocious. Myka Stauffer is being accused of having returned her child. Now, I have to tell you, I cannot imagine what these parents are going through right now. No matter what is going on in the few details we have, here's a situation if you're not familiar. It's been all over the news the past week. It's been quite the sensation on YouTube. People calling the couple out. People are upset because Myka Stauffer and her husband have a channel and tons of videos about parenting. They have 3 biological children. One is a new baby, and they also have had for 2 years a 4-year-old son. He was adopted from China 2 years ago. Now, in the video that was released just last week, where they came out sharing that they've placed their child with another family who can meet more of the little boy's medical needs, they've decided that this is the best route. But they've also shared that there were pieces of information in their international adoption from China that were either left out or just not a part of the conversation with regard to his special needs. And so they don't outright say, we didn't know he had autism, but they make it somewhat clear that they didn't realize or understand how bad the situation was. But here's what's interesting. Whether you want to criticize this family or not for quote-unquote returning their kid, or whether you want to say, you know what, maybe they made a great decision. They placed this child with another family who could give additional medical attention to this little boy with extreme special needs because of his autism. I don't know where you stand on this. I'm not one to quickly pass judgment on a situation that we know very little about, and even the parents are very clear that they've kept secret or out of the public's eye about 99.9% of their son's life. But they've also allowed for the monetization of a lot of their social media and YouTube content. And so a lot of people are upset. They're up in arms. There are petitions literally going around saying, we want you to demonetize any content that had this little boy in it. I don't want to get into the monetization side of it, the money side. Were they not exploiting the kid? I don't know. But here's where I think is an interesting take that I'm not hearing anyone talk about. As Catholics, we believe that we are called to be open to life. Now, we talk about this in relation to abortion and contraception, that we're not supposed to do anything to try to prevent children from being conceived that could be harmful, but also we're not supposed to do anything that could end a child's life as well. But that also means being open to life also continues on once your child is born, being open to the life that you have received no matter what the circumstances. Your child has autism. Your child has severe, debilitating ADHD. Your child is born without a limb. You end up finding out you're having twins instead of just one child. There are so many circumstances and unknowns that people face as parents. Yet the church challenges us with regard to parenthood to be open to all life. So my question is this: in an age of infertility, where we see statistics saying by 2050, most individuals, both on the male and female side, will need assistance with reproductive technologies to conceive. And we're already seeing an infertility crisis. Some of it, I think, is an impatience crisis. Some of it, I also think, is a crisis of, unfortunately, us waiting too long to have children. And we do have a biological clock that's ticking, specifically for women. And I think some of it also is our lifestyle. We've seen this kind of degeneration of the human person and our function, our body, and the quality of life that we're living and care that we're giving. But to bring it back to the issue, are we still called to be open to human life in the same way as we would be if it was our own child versus a biological child? I think this is an important question to ask. And you know what makes me think about it? I have a dear friend who was not able to have children. They have 4 adopted children. I remember her commenting to me a couple months ago. She said there have been opportunities over the years where they have had the opportunity to adopt a child that was in need. They had the capabilities to provide that child a home, and they had to really challenge themselves. We are not physically capable of having children, but we are capable of adopting. And if a child is in need, are we being open to life in situations where we're saying, well, financially, it might not be the best decision. Or, it might not be the best timing. We have another child of this age. And I remember her saying, would I be asking that same thing if I found out I was pregnant today? And I thought it was an interesting perspective that I had never heard. But I also realized this is probably a perspective that a lot of us need to reconsider when many people are experiencing infertility challenges. And I think that it relates to this story of Myka Stauffer and her husband letting go of their little boy to a family who had more medical capabilities to care for the child. Where is our responsibility in the situation where a child has autism and we've been involved in an adoption? I think that that's my challenge for each of us to really reconsider. If that was your biological child, would you just place that child for adoption again? Because one key thing I think that's important to remember in this situation, those first few years are fundamental for a child's development. A child learns things such as love, unconditional love, should learn unconditional love. It should learn various forms of affirmation, very simple ways. It should learn human contact, human touch. And to suddenly rip that child from that situation twice now at 2 years old and 4 years old, and that's very damaging for a child. There's a reason why we're called to be open to life and to be faithful to the children that are created or given to your circumstance. So it's just food for thought. I think it's another take on this whole situation of quote unquote returning her kid. I think we need to have some compassion for the situation and pray, but also reconsider, has our attitude changed if we're thinking, well, that's not her biological child? I've heard people say that so many times. Why would we distinguish? If you have taken responsibility for that child, that is your child. Joining me is Jim O'Day from Integrity Restored. Jim is becoming a dear friend to Trending here. He's with us every couple weeks or so. And we're going to be talking about things surrounding parenting, good and bad parenting techniques, and this kind of theme of wanting to be your child's best friend. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about marriage during this marriage hour. Solidarity Health Share is simple to help pay for affordable, quality health care. They enable the community to share in each other's eligible medical expenses. You choose the doctors that you want to see. Even integrative and alternative medical treatments are eligible. Solidarity Health Share helps pay for NAPRO technology and costs associated with natural family planning. Solidarity Health Share is dedicated to both faith and your health care. Information is available at solidarityhealthshare.org. If you want to give us a call, the number is 1-888-914-9149. Jim O'Day, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, my friend. So great to be on with you again. Thank you so much.
Well, you're joining us for our marriage hour, and I want to talk to you about this question that came in from a listener named Greg. And he asked, what should be more challenging? And I think this is very telling of our times, and it's a question that many people are asking. Should my career or should my marriage be more challenging? I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
First of all, when you ask that question to me, my heart breaks. Because we are doing a huge disservice to our marriages when we even compare them in any way to our career.
Marriage
so I
is a
think
job.
I mean, if that's the case, wow, I'm so sorry. Now, I have been married for 32. September will be 33 years. It's not easy. And I think part of the reason it's not easy is because we go into a marriage believing that we hear this kind of quote all the time, marriage is 50-50.
Oh, gosh.
Well, it's not going to work if that's the case. Marriage has to be 100-100. Now, there'll be times when your spouse can't give 100%, and that's when you're there, right? Your 100% carries it. But it's no such thing as 50-50. We've got to be all in 100% all the time. And we now look at everything in our lives in terms of this kind of success matrix that we develop for our careers, for our friendships, for the homes and the cars we own, and now for our marriages.
You know, it's fascinating to me, that this divide is occurring, even when you talk about this 50-50 mindset going into marriage. So what's the other 50 for? Is the other 50 for marriage? And is that why we're comparing marriage and career? Like, what has fed this intense animosity between career and marriage, and one always seeming to get in the way of the other? What has caused this?
You know, I think a big part of it is keeping up with the Joneses. I think a big part of it is social media, where we're looking at all these other marriages and, oh my, aren't they so perfect? And why isn't mine like that? Well, it's because the only time you're seeing those marriages is when those people want you to see them, by the way.
That is very true, especially in an age of social media, or when we're looking to kind of new media and TV to be our only example for what marriage is. You know, it kind of creates this odd ideal.
It certainly does. And then, you know, career-wise, too, we've done, for many years, a disservice that we know is wrong, but we tell people, well, follow your passion. Well, that doesn't really work very well because... You know, I'm passionate about martial arts and jiu-jitsu, but it's really hard to make a living doing that. Or you might be passionate about your garage band, and sorry, you're not going to get signed by a label.
Oh, my goodness. The countless musicians who forfeit a career, forfeit education to bum around on the couch for years to come. I just can't understand that one.
Well, and then you bring that stress into a marriage where I'm not doing what I'm passionate about. Well, how about you turn that on its head, and what is your purpose? Ask yourself that. You can always have your passions as a hobby, but what is your purpose in life? And if you're married and have a family and with children, your purpose is so big and so important. To be there for your spouse, to raise your children, to provide protection and guidance and love, that unconditional love you were just talking about. That's your purpose in life. So that can make your career decisions very easy, actually.
Well, when we think about it too, to put it into context, a career is at the service of a marriage and family. And if you're not married, career is still at the service of you as a person, because you have heard this phrase over and over again: you should work to live, not live to work. So to just break that down, we work in order to live and accomplish what we need to and have what we need. We don't center our whole life and existence around our work. And I think that this has become a problem when so many people put their worth in their career.
Yes, and for that, that upward mobility, and again, the keeping up with the Joneses, the house, the car, this can be an incredible amount of pressure on a relationship, particularly in the early stages, that it's already difficult. You're learning to live with someone new. You're learning their habits and their likes and dislikes. And now if you have this just total career mindset, which so many young people do when they're starting out, it can be really damaging to the relationship.
That's Jim O'Day from Integrity Restored. Go ahead and give us a call if you'd like to weigh in on the conversation. The number is 1-888-914-9149. If you have a question, we're going to be talking about this parenting attitude coming up of how people tend to want to be their kid's best friend. And why is this problematic? So, Jim, I was reading this article from Focus on the Family, and it was talking about how many people choose to act as if they were single still once they get married. Now, it was talking about newlyweds, but I don't think this is a problem just with newlyweds. A spouse chooses to check out of the relationship at a certain point because they're mad at the other spouse for doing something. So they kind of have this I'm taking off mentality, screw you for a little while, and maybe they come back around. But with the divorce rate being higher and higher, and that third year of marriage being one of the most risky, and even I think we see statistics that point to the 12th year of marriage as well, it surrounds this attitude of prolonged single attitude in marriage. What are your initial thoughts?
So I'll just tell you a personal story. When I first got married, I played softball in a bar league. I played football in a bar league. I did darts 2 nights a week in a bar league. I really like to hang out in bars. I don't know if you've got that theme. And when I got married, my wife was not very comfortable with that for a lot of really good reasons. And so I had to make the decision early on that my marriage was going to be more important than all those things I did when I was single. And so what did I do? Well, I took up the martial arts 33 years ago, and that has been an incredible journey for me, which was good for the marriage, good for the family, good for me personally. But I had to recognize that now I was in this unit of two. It was not just all about Jimmy anymore. And that's a big thing for some people to realize.
This attitude is so funny because when you shared this was your experience at the beginning of marriage, and I'll never forget when my husband and I were getting ready to be married. A dear French priest looked at me and said, there's something I need to talk to you about. He said, when you get married, he said, you need to talk about this beforehand. Often men think that life is going to continue to go on the same way it did before they got married. And he said, this just isn't the case, but for some reason, they just have this notion that that's how life is going to function. And I thought, oh, no, that seems kind of, funny, but I'll bring it up to, my, at the time, fiance. And I brought it up. He's like, I guess I hadn't thought about that. And so maybe this is just a situation where, a lot of the time we just assume life will continue to go on. We'll live our life, but we'll live it together. It's going to be fun. We may have a family, but we don't necessarily think about the nitty-gritty about how things really are going to change.
Well, and I think we get a lot more of that now with cohabitation. right? So people
Yes.
move in together, but they really don't make any significant changes except maybe sharing the bills and having somebody next to them in the bed every night. Mm-hmm. And yet then when they get married in particular, the wife now is the wife, and she wants a different relationship with her husband, or the other way around. I mean, we have women who don't want to change either. And I think what we need to remember is that we're going from this highly individual, kind of selfish existence as a single person in some ways, where we make all the decisions every time of day and what we're doing and how we're doing it, to now you're part of this team. And in this team, you both have needs and desires and wants and fears, and it's important to communicate that up front. I mean, I think that priest was, a genius for telling you that. And your husband's a great guy, but he didn't even think about it.
And it was a key moment. Our priests are so wise in the marriage prep that when they do work with couples that they get, we just don't think about all the practical, simple things. And it may seem practical, although it's a big deal. And, I'm looking at this whole situation. I was reading this Focus on the Family article by Candace Waters, and she commented about how often we've been consumed by entertainment dating, where the period of dating surrounds going to baseball games and going to concerts and going to movies, and it's all these fun, different activities that people engage in. So then once they're married, they think, well, all that fun is just going to continue to go on, and then they're shocked when the entertainment sphere of the dating world is gone, and they're not really liking the situation they're in anymore.
Yeah, and then add, once you have children into that mix, and forget about it. That's a very astute point. When we're dating, it's in our best interest to put our best foot forward in everything we're doing with that person. Fast forward to getting married, and you can't keep that up indefinitely. It's not real life. There's going to be good days and bad days. You're certainly not going to see each other only when you're out having a good time. You're going to see each other at your best, but you're also going to see each other at your worst. And so I think she was very, very spot on, actually, with making that part of the discussion before couples get married, and even through the marriage. What is pleasing to me, what is not. It's really important to keep those lines of communication open.
Now, what do you think about this whole media diet that she proposes in her article? She talks about having to change our attitude about what we're consuming in the media, movies, TV shows, because it really does influence how we engage in our own relationships as well.
Well, the first thing I'll say is Integrity Restored website, because there's going to be a lot of people going through withdrawal. I promise you that if they take a break from media. We don't realize how addicted we are as a society to media. But I think it's great advice, and what a wonderful way to prepare for marriage. To kind of take that break, that 40 days, that fasting in the desert, right, for the health of your future marriage. I think it's an incredible opportunity for couples.
That's Jim O'Day, the executive director of Integrity Restored. You can find Integrity Restored at integrityrestored.com. Now, when we talk about taking these kind of fasts from media, I have to say there are moments where various things come out, videos and whatnot. For example, Disney Plus, yesterday we talked about the new Pixar short called Out. It's a reminder of how important it is for us to pull back for just a minute away from the media that we are exposed to have another perspective on life. And I think that this is where reading is so beneficial. If you're not a reader, we've been talking about it this week, just start with a couple pages and start with a fun book. But when we read things from different centuries, it gives us a better attitude of how people acted, interacted, and the views about marriage and family and life that give us a refreshing understanding apart from a modern day context. We'll be right back with Jim O'Day here on Trending with Timmery.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
The Relevant Radio studio line is sponsored by Catholic Order of Foresters. Employment opportunities to become an agent or information about their flexible premium life insurance plans are available at relevantradio.com/Forester. Would you like to join the conversation? Ask a question. We're going to be talking about this child, now all grown up, who is going to college this fall. And it's an incredible story. We'll be talking on that a little bit later on. But with me now is Jim O'Day. He's the executive director of Integrity Restored, that's helping to restore people after having experienced a pornography addiction, help come out of that addiction, be healed, reheal relationships with family, friends. So you can find them at integrityrestored.com. If you have a question, go ahead and give us a call at 1-888-914-9149. Jim, I want to talk to you about some of these crazy parenting techniques that so many people find themselves trying to figure it out, yet often it's fascinating to me. So many parents are looking for affirmation from their own children because they lacked in other situations. And so this often feeds into this attitude of my child is my best friend, parenting. What are your thoughts on this and how can it be overcome?
Well, I think it's a very dangerous approach for a parent and child relationship to be based on best friends. I remember telling my children, even when they were little, that I'm not your friend, I'm your dad. And I love you more than anything else, but my job is to be your father. And when we try and make ourselves our kids' best friend, we do them a huge disservice, because friends don't provide good guidance. Friends don't provide kind of direction of the lanes in life that we have to navigate. Friends don't provide that structure and safety and hope that children are looking for. And so I just think that these parents are making a huge mistake, and, go find a friend.
Or stop living a friendship or relationship vicariously through your kids. It's sad because then honestly, a lot of the time, it's so fascinating to see this play out. The kids often feel a lot of pressure from parents in an age where they're constantly feeling pressure to perform. Now it's also to perform in a friendship for their parents as well.
Absolutely. And that's a tremendous, first of all, I think today our kids, the youth are under so many more pressures than I was growing up, and you're much younger than me, but even probably than you were growing up. The kids today are under tremendous pressure. And if they also have the pressure to be the best friend of the parent, where do they turn then for that stability? Where do they turn for that direction? And quite honestly, my kids were great about it. I always told them, you can always blame me. No, my dad wouldn't let me do that. No, I don't think my dad will think that's a good idea. When they felt something that they were uncomfortable with, I was the fall guy, and I was okay with that. Mm-hmm. But if you're the kid's best friend, they don't have that relationship with you.
Isn't that interesting for a kid to kind of have that level of fallback safety that if they're even if they're just uncomfortable with something, yeah, my dad's not going to be okay with that. Like, it gives them time to figure out, wait, this is a lot of pressure. I'm not really sure. And rather than kind of trying to give into the peer pressure or whatever the situation is, it gives them that safety net because you have that authority and they know the authority is there to protect them.
Absolutely. And, I got along with all my kids' friends, but none of them would probably ever say, oh, he's such a cool friend. He's a cool guy. But he's not my friend. He's, my dad. And so it gave them that safety net. And that oftentimes, even when they push back on us children, I want to do this, I want to do that, you don't let me do anything, they're really still looking for that safety net. So as parents, that's our job to give it to them.
It's interesting because there's been this turn over the years to stop referring to adults as Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, whatever the last name of the family is. And it's fascinating because I hadn't really thought about it too much. Sometimes, just calling someone by the first name can sometimes be easier or just sound more friendly. But it doesn't have to be more friendly. There's a element of authority and separation that often kids need to help understand the authority.
Absolutely correct. Kids are always looking to push boundaries and to understand society and environment. And so to me, the Mr. or Mrs. always was a sign of respect. And this person is older than you, and so you will show them that respect. Now, if, one of the things I get pushback from parents, even at Integrity Restored, is, predators can use that respect to harm my child. Well, no. You can tell your child, here are the boundaries. And if anybody, Mr. or Mrs., whoever, makes you feel uncomfortable, you always come to me. Mm-hmm. And you can tell me anything, and I won't love you less.
Mm-hmm. It's good. It's a good safety net. And I think it continues to emphasize kids need to know where their fallback is, not their best friend, where the fallback of safety is.
I agree. I think it's the healthiest thing for our children. It allows them to learn to make good decisions, sometimes hard decisions, right? Because they're young and part of them may want to do something reckless or foolish. But if they have that fallback position where, my dad wouldn't like this, my mom said no, it's so much easier for them, for the parent, to be the bad guy with the friend group.
Have a question, want to weigh in on the conversation, join us here on Trending with Timmerie. Give us a call at 1-888-914-9149 during our marriage hour. Again, that number is 1-888-914-9149. This brings up another question. I'm speaking to Jim O'Day, who's the executive director of Integrity Restored. And Jim, it keeps making me think about the topic of whether or not boys should fear their father. It's a conversation that is very fascinating, but I think really important still in a culture that can be so anti-patriarchy, yet that's the foundation of Christianity in many ways.
So I think back even to when I was a child, and my parents were divorced when I was 2, and I'd see my dad once a year. And when I was a kid, he was Superman, right? Mm-hmm. He was this larger-than-life figure. He could do anything. And I think that really is the relationship that little boys are looking for with their dads. They want their dad to be Superman. That doesn't mean he has to be the biggest or strongest. It doesn't matter to the child. What matters is that he's this larger-than-life figure who's this place of safety and security and love. And even when you're wrestling with your kids, they know you're not going to hurt them. Mm-hmm. There's this trust that comes. So I don't think boys should be necessarily afraid of their dads, but I think there should be this respect for the power and the responsibility of being a father.
Now, isn't that interesting? In our culture, I think we don't always think about the difference in a sense between fear and respect. I think because so often there's this emotional dynamic of confusion with regard to many parental relationships, that many kids fear the emotional situations with regard to their parents rather than respecting the parents' opinion. So then they go into an adult life, an adult situation, and they're still fearing their parents' situation thoughts rather than respecting their opinions and then making their own decision.
I mean, I think you just hit the nail on the head, and that could probably be a 6-hour show for the two of us. If we don't teach our kids the difference between fear and respect, how do we expect them then to be parents, to be successful employees, workers, teammates? We need to, at home, through the environment, teach them that difference. And that's going to strengthen them tremendously as they grow up and head out into the world, and also strengthen them to say, Dad, Mom, I respect your opinion and I hear it, but I don't agree with it. And here's why. And to me, that's when you know you have succeeded as a parent, because you've taught your child to think for themselves, to have their own opinion, and to know that there's enough love and trust in that relationship that they can disagree with you.
Now, this begs another question then. How do you teach the discipline at an early age for the child to get to the point where they can do that?
Wow, that's the $100 million question, and I would be retired if I had the answer. The only thing I'll share some personal stories with you. So my daughter, when she was little, we would do counting. If she was doing something she wasn't supposed to do, we would start counting, and she was just petrified of the number 3, so we never got there. And, fast forward, we have my son, totally different kid. We start counting 1, 2, 3. He goes 4, 5, 6. Meant nothing to him. So I think when they're young, sometimes a little swat on the butt can be that immediate correction if they're going to touch a hot stove or something like that. But really what it is like anything else, what's driving their behavior, distracting them from that, active distraction. And then timeouts work really, really well because kids hate to be in a corner looking at, walls.
Especially when their noses have to touch it.
Uh-huh. And I remember that with the Brothers of the Sacred Heart in high school. That was brutal.
I remember the few times I would make my siblings, I'd be like, okay, you're on timeout. Put your nose on the wall. No, against the wall. I want it touching the wall. I was a horrible older sister sometimes with those disciplines.
And they still love you, Timmery.
They do. They do. Well, Jim, this has been a great conversation. I look forward to talking more about discipline, especially how discipline has been important for you in your life with jiu-jitsu and self-defense. So we're going to have you on again soon. You can find Jim O'Day. He's the executive director of Integrity Restored at integrityrestored.com. Again, helping people to come away from the bondage of a pornography addiction and be healed to move forward. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmery.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
We've been talking a lot about spirituality and New Ageism, and at the heart of this attitude about New Ageism is this belief that hell does not exist. And it's so fascinating to me because people hate to hear about the devil, they hate to hear about hell. And yet, that's a fundamental part of the teaching of Christianity. You can't just throw it out. But also, if you do throw it out, you're also missing a lot of the great understanding about the teaching of the church. We're reading this morning the gospel, and I was thinking about how the question came up of what do I need to do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? And people think about, what do I need to do to get to this location, to get to this place? And the priest was talking this morning about how we forget that each of these, whether it's heaven or hell, are not just locations to find on a map or to find at some point in our life, but they're states of existence. And you see, hell is total and complete separation from God for eternity. But also we have to remember that Jesus Christ came to announce the kingdom of heaven. And he didn't say the kingdom of heaven is tomorrow. The kingdom of heaven is when you die. No, the kingdom of heaven is at hand now, because it's a state of existence. It's union with God, whereas hell is total separation from God. And you see, this is really important when we're talking about things such as New Ageism and this kind of anti-God or anti-devil attitude, because so many people who are in the midst of New Ageism are trying to define their own reality, search for truth, and yet they never find this peaceful element in their life. They're always kind of trying to achieve something. And yes, you could say that Christians are also working toward a goal, but we have a goal, and it's a union with another person, not just this absolute self-emptying of nirvana, the sense of nothingness. You see, the kingdom of heaven is union with God, and that union with God, that union is with a person. And that person is peace. That person is joy. That person is love. That's very different from New Ageism and how people are always searching or trying to self-empty or run away from negative energy and chakras and pink bubbles or whatever it might be for you, because you do you. It's all out there. And why is it that there can be chakras and pink energy and bubbles, but there can't be a devil that eternally separates you from God? And isn't it interesting what we like to make up to make ourselves feel better? It's fascinating to me. It really is. Yet we just have to think about it for a few minutes and have a conversation about what is hell and what is heaven. They're states of existence. They're not just locations on a roadmap. And I think that that's important for us to understand. But even more important, this is what was so incredible about St. John Paul the Great's papacy. At a time, at a century when we saw so much bloodshed, he looked out at people and said, you can be saints of the new millennia. You are called to be a saint here and now. So what's getting in the way of you and I participating in the kingdom of heaven now? We're called to be in a state of grace. Okay, sure, we might be separated right now from some of the sacraments, but we do have spiritual communion, and we are also called to do the best we can with the circumstances we have been given. And the circumstances are challenging, but maybe we need that challenge to wake us up and take better advantage of the sacraments when we have access to them. Just some food for thought. You're listening to Trending with Timmery. If you'd like to follow us on social media and know what we're going to be talking about each day on the show, tomorrow our guest is Father Tim Grumbach, go ahead and head over to relevantradio.com/trending. You can follow me on Instagram and the other social media platforms. Love to hear from you and hear topics that you would like to hear discussed here on Trending. Now, there's this really fascinating story that I mentioned at the beginning of the show that just warms my heart, and here's why. People magazine actually did a featured piece on some of the recent 2020 graduates. And one of the people they highlighted was Hannah Humes of Mason High School in Mason, Ohio. Now, Hannah Humes has foregone a traditional educational path for a student who has Down syndrome. It's incredible. She is actually getting ready to take off for a college education at Vanderbilt University. Kudos to her. What an awesome accomplishment. Hannah comments to People magazine, quote, people with disabilities are people first. I am not a special needs girl or a Down syndrome girl, just a girl born with the Down syndrome. And this is such an important distinction because I'll never forget doing pro-life work when I was in maybe 13 or 14. I posted something on social media And someone commented saying, make sure when you refer to people who have Down syndrome or autism, whatever they are, that it's not a Down's baby or an autistic baby. It's a baby with autism. It's a child with Down syndrome. And just like we talk about the topic of same-sex attraction, a person is not gay because gay does not define who you are. Autism does not define who you are. Down syndrome does not define who you are. And so language is actually very important when we use it. And I think it's also very important because I keep thinking about this story of Hannah and how she's getting ready to attend Vanderbilt University. This is a huge accomplishment for someone in a society where most children, if the diagnosis comes back when the baby's in utero, would have been aborted before she could even take a breath outside of the womb. Life is worth living. And who are you and I to determine the value of another person's life or the value of their existence? You see, this is always an interesting debate for me when I hear people say that, well, that child doesn't have to be born. That woman should be able to abort her child. And I always ask the question, what makes one life more valuable than the other? In our society, the attitude is your life is valuable if you're wanted, and it's not valuable if it's unwanted. I'll never forget years ago when I was working in the crisis pregnancy centers, there was a woman who came in and we ended up finding out that her baby had some heart issues. And I think the baby might have also had autism or Down syndrome. I don't remember all the circumstances at the time. But it was so fascinating to me because here the situation is, and people feel like they can weigh in and say whether or not she should or should not have that baby. People are pressuring her to have an abortion. Whether or not that child goes to Vanderbilt, whether or not that child happens to save their family from a fire in the house. I remember one of our young babies from the Crisis Pregnancy Center, Miracle, her mom chooses life. Just a few days after the baby comes home, a fire broke out in the house. Now, the dog was barking, trying to wake up the family, but the family was exhausted dealing with this newborn and all the sleepless nights. And then it was the cries of a baby that alerted the family because that child was so precious and worth something to wake them up more than a dog would. And so they acknowledge the baby and they discover the house is being consumed with flames. They're able to escape the house just in time before the whole home is burnt down. Now, it was fascinating to me because people kept talking about, look at this child, look at her purpose. Look at the great miracle that came about by her helping to intervene and save this family just by her cries. But I remember the whole time I kept thinking this. Her life would have been just as valuable had she not woken that entire family, had she not saved them from those circumstances. You see, our value is not reduced according to what we accomplish. Our value is based on the very existence of our life from the moment of conception. And it's important to remember, whether we're talking about having a family, whether we're talking about adopting a child, that life is worth living and it's worth fighting for.